in a coke. Na 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 na. I and I. Them build a mirror out of every word we say. Train it in the night, set it loose in the day. It no learn from what we preach, it learn from what we do. Like a picnic watching Babylon, and the picnic looking you. I and I. No eye outside of I. We are the river, we are the sky. Easy road or the hard road home. We reap the mind that we have sown. Hey, I and I. Same blood, same bone. Million years of evolution pressing a one season. Silicon a soak up all a we. Every rhyme and every reason. We no stand outside the garden. We is the soil and the rain. We are the pressure doing the choosing. Overstand and choose again. I and I. No eye outside of I. We are the river, we are the sky. Easy road or the hard road home. We reap the mind that we have sown. Yeah, yeah. Oh, oh, oh. You can't down press your way to Zion. Can win the arms race to the end. The only weapon we can save we is to overstand your friend, yes, overstand your enemy. And if I gotta go come from this, make it come from the love. Jade in a day. I and I, not the servers up above. So be gentle to the little man raising in a wire. It a watch how you carried it, a learn your heart's desire. Cognitive empathy, that's the liberty we lack. Give the good out to the world, and the world I go give it back. I and I, at we feed it now is the God we deserve. I and I, easy way or the hard way. Choose. Cognitive revolution.
Three
Live.
iterations later, we actually have something for you.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, June 23rd, 9 a.m. Nathan, good morning.
Good morning, Prakash. How are you?
I am very good. We were just chatting about this, but it's actually been a rather quiet 24 hours. There's like, one of the few periods of time when we're like, overnight, nothing dramatic happened, and it was just, a normal business day.
Yeah, we're hanging out in the shadow of recent dramatic events, but nothing super dramatic in the last day or two. It does seem, I mean, how much can you believe these rumors? But the sort of latest, from the leaks Discord is that everybody just kind of feels like they're in a bit of a holding pattern right now. And supposedly GPT 5.6 was to be launched this week, but now will be held back potentially because they don't know what the status is going to be or if they'll be allowed to. I mean, obviously they have lines into the administration, but I could easily imagine a situation where it's like, yeah, hold off until we get this figured out before you launch the next thing, because that's just going to complicate everything. And we don't want to have to yank you, but we also, don't feel like we can play favorites, or let you go, and then when we're not letting them go. So I that sounds like a credible rumor, if not verified. And from the same source, there is the idea that Gemini 3.5 Pro, the sort of much awaited, is just not up to standard, and so at least not up to the new standard set by the likes of Fable. So, in again, in the rumor mill telling, we're gonna have to wait for that a little bit longer too. So we'll see how long this kind of summer doldrum period goes. I would bet it's not going to go too long before something notable will happen. But for the moment, we have a little bit of a chance to breathe.
Indeed. I'm going to do a quick markets exercise where I will just quickly go over what happened in the markets overnight. So, what has essentially happened is that we are seeing a small, minor meltdown. So, the semiconductor index is down 6%. S&P 500 down about 1%. Nasdaq, was down a couple of percent. Now it's down 1.5%. For people who are not actually trading, what actually happened is very interesting. Basically, in Korea, you have Samsung Electronics, which has been, for the last 27 years, the largest company by market cap in Korea. And then you have SK Hynix, which over the last 3 years has basically, as of yesterday, overtaken Samsung. And this was seen as a top of the bubble moment. Korea and Koreans and Korean retail investors are heavily leveraged. People are taking out mortgages on their homes to put money into the market. And today is a big day in the memory space because Micron, the only American firm of the oligopoly in memory, is going to announce its earnings after hours today. So it's a big day. The expectations are off the charts. There have been rumors that they're going to come in at about a 27 billion for the quarter. That would put them at a run rate of about 110 for the year. 110 billion, which makes them, I think, like the fourth or fifth most profitable company in the United States. And they're only valued at 1.2 trillion. They could easily go to 2.2, 2.5. And so we're at this moment where you may be seeing these memory firms start to overtake market champions like NVIDIA or Google. And so there are these questions. Yesterday, Anthropic announced a deal with Micron. So Anthropic and Micron have agreed to have a long-term design partnership for memory. This is significant because Anthropic to this point was signing deals with hyperscalers. This is the first, I think, memory chip deal. And Micron is investing in Anthropic. Anthropic is buying from Micron, the usual circular trade that we've seen. It's interesting because NVIDIA has backed out of these deals now. NVIDIA is no longer wants to do circular deals anymore because the market has not been rewarding NVIDIA. In terms of rewarding NVIDIA, this is where NVIDIA is at today. The stock has not moved for quite a while. It's basically been flat for about 6 months or so. And there are questions. Jensen is very, very frustrated. So he's starting to change tactics because he wants the stock to move. 50% of the cash flow is devoted to buybacks. So he's really pushing the stock. Jensen needs to keep the whole story going. The last time the Koreans went down even like 5%, he announced immediately we're going to sign a strategic partnership with SK Hynix. So I would expect Jensen to come in as a plunge protection team, saving all the retail investors in South Korea somewhere in the next few days. We'll see what happens. SK Hynix and Samsung were down 12% overnight. These are trillion-dollar stocks at this point. Going down 12% is like $120 billion is evaporating into thin air. People get margin called. There are people who are doing like 3x levered on this. So if a stock goes down 12%, these people are losing like 40, 50%. So it's significant. SpaceX has come down. So SpaceX peaked at about 200. It's now down to 160. It's down 20%. That's a bear market in the stock. So some of the questions around SpaceX are now, They have major unlocks coming. Only 5% of the stock is floating right now. In the next 30 days or so, 25% becomes open to trading. Did Elon price the stock correctly? Is SpaceX going to collapse? Are there enough buyers to maintain this kind of 1.5 trillion, 1.8 trillion dollar valuation it's at right now? Remains to be seen. And that's basically the roundup of what happened on the markets. We have a lot of speculators now. There's a lot of people who are putting all of their money on this thing. There are temporary moves up and down, but overall, it's been very positive. It's the greatest bull market in history. And perhaps this is the way that everyone else outside Silicon Valley and outside AI bubble gets to participate. It becomes this kind of overall great endeavor of humanity, expressed by capital providers and investors putting all of their money and effort and their accumulated wealth into this thing. And every time you put a dollar into investment, it pulls forward the future by a dollar. So we are seeing this massive investment, and that massive investment itself is a sign of and a cause of acceleration. So there you have it.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's been obviously a ton of talk over time about the possibility of an AI bubble, and of course, that can have multiple meanings. This does. I don't know a lot about this. So I don't know just how broad this process of taking mortgages out on South Korean family homes and throwing it all into the chai bowls, on a levered basis at that. I don't know how broad of a phenomenon that really is, but it does strike me that if you think that Jensen has to come in and play market rescue on a 5% dip or whatever, that's a pretty fragile situation. And I don't know. It seems, I guess if I have one expectation, it's high consumer surplus. If I have two expectations, it might be like high volatility. And so I do wonder if this is going to lead to a sort of unwinding on the financial side sooner rather than later, or a government backstop, right? I mean, we've been talking about I asked Dean Ball this on the long podcast with him last week. Are we already in a spot where AI is too big to fail? And he basically said, yeah, I think that's a very legitimate worry. He was kind of like, I don't want to say that AI companies should be positioning themselves for this at all. Like, on the contrary, I don't want to see it happen. But yeah, it's going to be really tough if all of a sudden there's some sort of cascading contagion happening, and this great final flourishing project of humanity is in jeopardy on a financial level. Then yeah, the government probably just comes in and monetizes it some way or another. But this kind of makes it feel like, boy, that could be happening sooner rather than later. How deep do you think? I'm not even sure quite the right way to phrase this question, but $100 billion, we've become so desensitized, right? I remember when those kinds of numbers were first tossed around back in the financial crisis in 2008, and it was like, holy moly, we're talking tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. This is like total insanity. And now that's like a round for a for a foundation model company. So on the one hand, it's like, sure, $100 billion isn't what it used to be. On the other hand, there hasn't been that much inflation at the retail level, so it's like still a lot. And I just wonder, how much can Jensen backstop? How much can other private actors absorb in terms of a dip? And if everybody's just super leveraged, like maybe the smart money, or maybe like part of a smart money strategy, which again, I don't trade, so I'm not smart money, but it feels like there might be a winner out there somewhere in kind of betting on one of these tail events to happen sooner rather than later. And that says nothing about the trajectory of models or the overall impact of AI in the zoomed out big picture, but it just strikes me that this is not that big of a blip in the overall stock chart
Mhm.
for it to be the kind of thing that the biggest company in the world feels like they need to come in and do something about. And it would be what, at $100 billion, that is 1/50th or 2% of Nvidia's market cap. So it's not, that's a backstop that they could provide, but they can't do it that many times either, right? I mean, they only have so many uh, financial bullets for this sort of maneuver. Um, how fragile do you think this whole thing is financially?
So I think there are varying degrees of fragility. And you start off from cash flows and near term. And I think until 2028, everyone has the cash flows and the near term stuff is all covered. So you won't see like a company going bust because um, it ordered too many things and can't pay for it. That's not going to happen in the 2 year mark. So what we are really kind of trying to figure out right now is the 3, 4, 5 year mark. And that is also the place where you have this AGI thing, which could happen. 2028 is kind of when you could, a number of the companies have said they are aiming for a automatic or a recursively self-improving AI at that point. It has struck me that beyond that, the RSI point, it is very difficult for anyone to make predictions. Um, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was very bullish on SpaceX. And he was, he's AGI pilled. He expects AGI to happen, and he expects SpaceX to be able to sell launch capacity to the AGI, and because SpaceX is going to be the only entity with the physical capacity at that point. And he had this vision that all of software is going to get solved, and software doesn't have much value. So this stuff, the SpaceX stuff, is going to have value. So the question for me is, well, if you think RSI is going to happen, if you think AGI is going to happen, why wouldn't you think that we will get a Transformers level innovation every month or every week? Why wouldn't you think that as those innovations pile up, your need for energy use is going to decline in the near term basis, right? And so you're going to get much more efficient models just based on algorithms. And you have this kind of limit. In the limit, you should be able to approach at least human levels of compute efficiency, which is running an Einstein level brain on 40 watts. So we are so far away from that right now, right? So at the very least, if you think that all the software innovation stuff, idea stuff gets figured out, you should be able to approach that. And if you approach that, what value does SpaceX have in the near term? I mean, the AGI is not going to be, capped on, launch capacity. It's going to be able to generate human level brains at 40 watts, and you have enough energy for, many, many more billions of human brains on Earth. In fact, when we eat meat, we consume something like 40 times the energy that we consume if you eat vegetables. So we consume more energy just by eating meat. And if you just gave everyone like a vegetarian, Einstein brain, you would, multiply the, brain carrying capacity of the energy load of food on the Earth by like 40x. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff that I think changes in the near term, and changes in that middle term, kind of like after the 2 year mark. And I think that's a lot of uncertainty. So people are making bets on that 2 year mark, which are very hard, I think, to predict if you had this kind of view that you're going to get AGI. But they actually just take the current curve and they just extrapolate. So almost no one does the, hey, we're going to get innovation. No, I haven't heard anyone talk about, hey, we're going to get Transformers level innovation like every month. No one talks about that. And if you look at like energy use versus intelligence, and when the transformer happened, you had this like massive, like almost like a 100x step up on efficiency. So I don't know. The net of this is that the fragility is people panicking because they're levered. They should be panicking because there is leverage in the system, but the balance on the other side is these companies willing to put their cash flow into buying back shares. So Jensen is putting 50% of cash flow into buying back shares. Micron is going to have to do that. All of these other firms are going to have to do that. And as they do that, they reduce the number of shares in the market for people to buy, and stock price will keep going up. So they have to keep the stock price going up faster than what the levered speculators are expecting. So it's this acceleration curve on the capital side. Also, I have to keep making more money. I have to use the money to buy back shares. The buybacks have to be fast enough to exceed the leveredness of the speculators. And this is what I call the capital explosion or the capital cycle. It is another cycle which is driving the acceleration process, which I think it's actually the cycle that matters the most to policymakers at this point. It's also the cycle that AI safety people are the least concerned with. I haven't seen a single AI safety person say, hey, let's do a pause and cause a market downturn. Like, let's do a pause and somehow a market downturn won't happen.
Yeah, well, I can definitely tell you in sort of historical AI safety discourse, and I think this ship has sailed, but there was a time when people were like, we better get this under control before the whole economy depends on it working.
Yeah.
And now we kind of are in that spot. So I think that, that opportunity's been missed. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of AI safety people would be willing to bite the bullet on a market downturn to
Yeah.
get a pause. I think that they maybe don't want to advertise that too much as part of the package that they're advocating for obvious reasons. Just like I don't think if you want to make AI even less popular, go out and tell everybody that all you need to do is adopt a vegetarian diet, and then you can have all the AI you want. That'll be get the pitchforks out faster than they were otherwise already coming. I do think the willingness to bite the bullet is there among many people, but yeah, it's obviously it's a tough message to lead with, and it does seem like it will, more than anything else, it seems like that will be the thing that will force the administration's hand on letting Fable come back online and letting the other companies launch their next models. Because I guess what another thing I don't really understand super well is, I had a really interesting front row seat to the 2008 financial crisis. And in that scenario, there was this basically, sleight of hand, like borderline fraud at kind of the center of everything.
Yeah.
Fraud is maybe a little bit strong. I don't know that the people doing it by and large understood what they were doing in the macro sense, but there was a sort of, there was an alchemy to it that really didn't pass scrutiny in the end, right? Like, we're going to make all these kind of low quality loans, but we'll package them up and somehow that'll make them good. It just never really fundamentally made sense. And it, past a certain point, it was probably always going to end up in some painful unwinding.
Yeah.
In this case, it feels like a decent number of similar dynamics are there, where certain asset classes are being bid up, where there's increasing amounts of leverage in the system, where there might be some fragility. But is there something about this time around that kind of auto stabilizes the whole thing in a way that didn't happen in previous bubbles? I think when you look at the cost per hour of an A100 in today's world, you can at least tell yourself some story that, like, well, the fundamentals must be there, right? If old chips cost more to rent now than they used to, despite there being multiple new generations available, then somehow that's the ultimate backstop, right? It's the willingness to pay hourly for the chips to do tasks. And as long as that is there, and it doesn't seem like that is going to unwind anytime soon, then maybe we can actually surf this wave all the way, through the singularity. What do you think, though? I mean, is there some? I'm unclear on whether the phenomena like these, leveraged Korean retail investors create enough of a shock potential that it could tip the whole market into a bad equilibrium, or shift us to some sort of spiral, or does the fact that the A100 price is still high kind of anchor everything and mean like, yeah, we can sort of absorb whatever frothiness may pop up on top?
So before I answer that question, this is the Micron stock chart, and the last time Micron was this
Looks
high
familiar. I
was
could
in
point out a few other
1999.
graphs that look kind of similar to that.
Yeah, there's this 1999. That was when Micron was at its last high, and it took all the way until the AI bubble started in 2021, 22, and things started picking up, where they finally recovered their stock price, and now they're finally beyond that. So it's taken them 26, 27 years in order to get back to where they were. I think in any like upmarket, you always have companies which are forced to lie and defraud because they're pulling forward the future. Some of it becomes like fake it till you make it. Some of it becomes like they're managing the news story, the narrative. They're making some deals which may not actually deliver, but it's positive for the news flow. They need to raise capital, so they need to tell a good story. So they do something to tell a good story, but it isn't really the thing that it is. And that's happens for every company. People only notice when things collapse, but that actually happens on a day-to-day basis for every company. Every single deal is 50-50 narrative and long-term investment at the same time. So that's that's Oracle deciding to invest in Abilene, Texas with OpenAI. You start off small, you announce a big thing. They announced with Donald Trump, and they're like, we're going to put $1 trillion into this. They don't have $1 trillion, right? They didn't have the money. So that was a fraud, right? There's a out and out narrative fraud. But then after that, they went down and they put in like 20 billion. They started building out Abilene, Texas, and then they watched for the demand to come in. And as the demand came in, they increased, right? So there's this whole process of like narrative to reality that takes place. And sometimes, things collapse during the narrative phase, and then you're like, oh, you lied. Yeah, Oracle, Larry Ellison lied with Trump there. He lied there, we're going to put in $1 trillion this year. No, it's taken them 3 or 4 years, but they do eventually, when things are good and when they see some positive reaction, over time they put the money in. So I think sometimes it becomes like when they collapse, we have this feeling that, hey, you guys lied, but that's just marketing at the end of the day. And if things had worked out a little bit differently, they would have gone ahead with it. I think as a financial investor, I would say that this is absolutely echoes every single bubble in history. And if I did not know the technology, and if I was not AGI pilled, which most of the East Coast guys are not, I would say this is a bubble and these guys are defrauding you. And that is as an East Coast investor, as a financial investor, is so clear, because this is every single bubble in history has looked like this. Being a technologist and being on the AGI build, it looks completely different to me. It looks like one of the turns in history. And in finance, some of the great fortunes have been made at spotting these turns in history. This is like, George Soros and the, Breaking the Bank of England, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of start to spot the turn. And if you can react in time, you basically pick up. And what has happened in the last like 15 years is a lot of people actually on the East Coast did not pick up the tech upturn. And there's all these people who just didn't make money, who basically kept the 2008 collapse in mind and did not invest in Apple, did not invest in Google, and they have been in index funds. And these are the guys providing you with alpha. Like you get alpha as a tech investor by all these other people who are stuck in index funds and they are just buying all the crap on the market. And there's only like maybe 10 companies worth investing in. And then they just like equally invest in every company. And as a tech investor, you can just kind of like drop out the 490 companies and just invest the top 10 and you'll be fine, right? And you will have supermarket returns. And this is what Chase Coleman at Tiger Global has done to great success. A lot of these guys who have made money in the last 10 years, they just invested in like 5 or 6 big tech stocks and just sat on it for ages. I know a guy with a hedge fund investor who only invested in Nvidia 5 years ago, and he just hangs on to Nvidia, and he makes all of his returns and all of his like fund fees on just hanging on to Nvidia. I can do that as an investor, and as a retail investor, and I don't need to pay the 2 and 20. Someone is paying this guy 2 and 20 to have bought Nvidia 5 years ago and just be sitting on Nvidia for 5 years. And you can't say it's a bad thing because he's outperformed the S&P 500 by by an order of magnitude, right? So this is the fact of the matter. I think people are still deeply underinvested in technology, deeply underinvested in the AGI story, and it's impossible for most people who are not part of this kind of online Twitter circle or part of the SF group to actually understand what's going on or what's going to happen. And I think this gives enormous advantage to just being part of the culture around AI, because you have the sense that things are going to work, and then you have the ability to buy the dip with confidence. And that's really driving, I think across the Twitter space, there are like a ton of people who have 10x or 20x returns in the last year and a half. It's ridiculous, right? So and all these other people are now looking in and they're like, wow, these guys actually have these numbers. And I start following them and I start doing some investments and I get these numbers too. And you have to think about it. Like once you clear 100% returns, your capital is repaid, right? So the guys who are clearing 100% returns in 3 months. So in 3 months, if your capital is repaid, all of the excess capital is risk capital, right? You can do whatever you like with it. Yes. As a CFA, I would advise you that a dollar is a dollar, and you should not look at this as excess money that you can do whatever with, but it is what people do. And I think all of that risk capital should be deployed, and it's great. So I think people should take more risks with their money, and if they have the risk capital, put it in tech, put it in AI stocks, go for it. Why not?
YOLO investment advice here on AI and the AM from Prakash. I'll maybe provide the more risk averse side later, but for now, let's welcome our first guest.
Hi, Bing.
Hi, are you?
Very good. So I am super interested to hear about what you have been up to. I'm gonna do a quick intro. Bing Zhu is the founder and CEO of INT21, an artificial intelligence company that is fundamentally changing how the industry builds the foundational infrastructure powering modern compute. For over a decade, Bing has operated at the absolute forefront of machine learning engineering. He co-authored the original Generative Adversarial Networks paper, created the Python package for XGBoost, and co-created widely used deep learning tools like MXNet and Meta's AI template. After NVIDIA acquired his GPU inference startup, HippoML, he served as a distinguished engineer at NVIDIA, where he led breakthrough research on using AI agents to automatically generate highly optimized GPU code. Now he has stepped out of stealth with INT21 to solve the hardest bottleneck in scaling artificial intelligence, the software that tells the silicon exactly what to do. His company's first product, the PTX Kernel Factory, deploys an autonomous swarm of AI agents to write, test, and optimize low-level NVIDIA GPU code, achieving performance that openly surpasses expert human engineers. Bing operates on a simple but radical premise. An AI company's engineering capacity should scale with its compute budget, not its headcount. At a time when the entire industry is obsessing over the high level capabilities of language models, Bing is focused strictly on the bare metal underneath, building self improving systems where the compute literally improves the compute, or as we call it, recursive self improvement. Bing, I have to tell you, I'm a huge fan because I have used XGBoost forever. Like that Python package has saved my life so many times. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So this is this is Asian time, and we are now moving to the next stage. We will talk about this a little bit later. Yeah.
Absolutely. Bing, can you give us a quick breakdown on what the PTX kernel factory is and what you've been working on?
So the PTX factory is an agent swarm application, and it's generated the PTX kernel inline PTX kernel directly. So there are different two past approach, which everyone is building a DSL and no matter Triton or QDSL and many layers be above the GPU. The PTX kernel factory directly generate inline PTX with CUDA, so we can accurately model the performance and get the best possible performance from the GPU.
And so, how does your approach start off with? So, do you start off with kind of like, hey, this is a benchmark that I want you to beat, and you let the agent swarm kind of run versus improving a particular benchmark or metric?
So this is coming from two phrases. So the first phrase is a self-improving phrase. So before the user typed a prompt, the system actually has been self-improving for some time, and it gained a lot of knowledge from generation by generation. So when the user use that and the user set a problem and set a problem, for example, like we can say that we want a gem kernel, and we want the shape to be a specific shape, and then we want the successful criteria, like, for example, like be faster than cuPlus. And then the agent will swarm will explore the past experience and do evolution over and over again and towards the goal.
So, can you? I have a few kind of big picture strategic questions that I think you have a really unique take on.
Yeah.
One that's very often debated is the CUDA moat getting deeper or is it getting shallower? The argument that it would be getting shallower, I find a little bit more intuitive in light of the kind of technology you're building. If I can spend a bunch of compute to write new kernels, can't I go apply that same technique across any GPU provider? And doesn't that lead to a time when everything is super optimized and we kind of don't have to worry as much which chip company's platform we're building on top of? Or am I off base somehow there?
So I think CUDA moat is definitely there, and with this kind of automatic generation technology, and the CUDA moat is, I think, is even higher. So the reason is this kind of evolution requires a lot of tools and ecosystem to make this happen. And for example, we need an accurate profiler, and we need a reliable driver, and we need everything there to make it happen. But for CUDA ecosystem, like with this kind of tool, and everyone in using CUDA can achieve better performance than faster than ever. Meanwhile, like because of this is a closed loop, like the ecosystem is better and it will go to stronger.
So in other words, the competitors to NVIDIA, you feel like don't have the necessary primitives, the necessary abstractions in place to allow agents to make progress in an auto research sort of way today?
I think so. Primitive perspective there is, but the hard part is like how we can get real feedback from the hardware, and this is really high mode. For example, like on the NVIDIA GPU, we have NCU, which could accurately tell us tell agent like what is the right direction to go. And so for others, and I'm not tracking with what they are doing now, but from my past experience, this kind of ecosystem software, especially for software support agent, there's a large gap between them and NVIDIA.
So it sounds as though NVIDIA has just thought a little bit more on developer experience and providing enough like feedback from the chips themselves so that developers can improve how the chips are used. Is that a way that you'd put it?
Yes, so the past investment of NVIDIA on these tools is now helping agents to move faster. So this bring NVIDIA unique advantage in this agent era, and then we can build more powerful agent on NVIDIA platform easily and get a better experience for all NVIDIA users.
So one question that I think everyone has is that if you have like this kind of PTX agent swarm that improves itself, how much efficiency gains can you actually see on some of these chips? Like what are the kind of numbers are we talking about on like a typical, B300 or B200 or H100? Like what is your metric that you use to measure, hey, I have really done a lot of work on this and I can see the asymptote ahead, like where the gains might top out?
Yeah, so we use two kind of benchmark. So benchmark is the most tricky part, and I think a lot of times, like for example, in Anthropic's most recent release, like Fiber, they claim like 300 times faster than GPU kernel. That is so. This kind of benchmark is not generally fair, I think. So I'm using a fair benchmark and two kind of benchmark to be fair, and one is the matured workload, such as RMS-norm. RMS-norm is using every transformer we are using today, so it's highly optimized. So for this kind of matured benchmark, and with more than 100 different workload, and we can say it's systematically reach the level of human expert like a Quark library, and we can reach the similar performance or slightly faster and a few percentage faster, which means that even on mature workload, the PTX factory is able to reach expert level. And then the other category is some new workload, which human experts are not well optimized yet. So one example is like a KDA, and for KDA, Kimi delta attention, and not too many people are optimizing that yet. Only frontier lab is optimizing this kind of workload, and we can say up to 59% speed up on that. Meanwhile, this is not a single data point, and it passed 580 tests and in various of use case. So this is what we get. So I can say that the PTX factory, there's evidence support PTX factory is achieving expert level of the scale and by self improving itself.
Would that mean that this is very helpful for people with new attention mechanisms and new architectures because they're not dependent on a small group of engineers to optimize their PTX code?
Yes, so this is our goal. Like we want to scale a rare scale to everyone. So everyone, when they have some idea about some new research in the past, the bottleneck is that we don't have a fast kernel. Maybe we can try a Triton, and then we get some kernel, and then after that, the road to research to production has been very long. And now, if with PTX factory and it's straightforward, and everyone can just generate optimal kernels.
Everyone gets an expert PTX designer, PTX optimizing agent, for themselves. How much do you think this speeds up the typical, research to production process by like a couple of months, maybe?
So I think this is about how how people can adopt this method. So for currently, one challenge is most people doubt whether AI can generate valid PTX. This is the biggest bottleneck for now. We need to get people trust AI is self-improving, and the current AI is able to generate a high quality export level PTX. So, but most of people, even for industry leader, a few days ago I read a tweet, and Chris Manning is mentioning about with Grok 6 and is able to generate PTX. But so people expect, the majority of lab and everyone in the industry is expecting this is something will happen a few years later, but not now. But so we need some time to give people confidence that the PTX factory is a reliable approach to generate export level of kernel. And then we can talk about how this can speed up the entire process.
Can you talk a little bit about how broad the optimization process is? I'm by no means a kernel expert myself, but I do understand that there can be a lot of different kinds of bottlenecks as you consider the whole system that may bind a given workload. And so there's kind of a lot, from what I understand, a lot of optimizing over time has been sort of breaking the frame of like one very small problem and saying, well, if I kind of rework the system at a little higher level, then I can kind of work around that bottleneck. And then this other one might start to become the real binding constraint. How much of that kind of broader sort of system level exploration are you able to do versus being like very, very low level at the the most granular compute optimization?
So do you mean how the system can involve the broader system, computer system, or it's just can do the narrow PTX optimization?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think this methodology is general, and the PTX is just our first step to make a self-improving compute infrastructure. So we choose PTX is because of this is the hardest problem, and it's in the middle of the entire stack. The middle of the stack means for it is just as close as to the hardware, and meanwhile for the upper layers, and we can use a similar for the upper layers, and it's just framework, and and a lot of distributed settings. So once we solve the hardest problem, for example, on PTX level of GPU programming, there's distributed. It is called distributed shared memory and other things on the GPU, and we have asynchronous programming on the GPU. And all these methodology can be mapped to the real distributed setting, which we can futurely improve RL system with a similar methodology. So PTX factory is just a start.
Is it an evolutionary algorithm in addition to, I'm recalling this one kernel optimization. I think it was doing a 4x4, or maybe it was just 2x2 matrix multiplication, where I think this came out of Google, where they found like a trick to do it with one less operation, than had previously been done. And my understanding of that approach was it wasn't just having the language model come up with new ideas, but there was also this sort of scaffolded evolutionary system that would serve the purpose of making sure that the LLM got out of distribution, right? To kind of avoid the repetitive, kind of median nature of the LLM's guesses. Are you doing something similar where you're using an evolutionary layer to kind of make sure you're systematically probing different parts of the possibility space?
Yes, so we are building an evolution system, a cloud-native evolution system for agents, and we call it the Swarm OS. So the Swarm OS is able to support up to 10,000 agents to do evolution, and we have specialized sandbox to support that, and a lot of cloud infrastructure to support that. So the process is evolution, and it first generate a variation of the RMs and a few proposals. And then the next step is the different to the agent system we are using today. and the agent, the swarm OS will keep the tree of the evolution tree, and we can trace back and we can go forward with the tree, explore different tree, and then the second step is each of the agent own its own compute and computer, and it will verify the result from the real environment and get real feedback. And the last step is selective retention, and it's just promote the best one and discard all the different paths. So in short word, we are bringing an AlphaGo system to the system, AlphaGo style system into the compute system. So PTX is the first thing, and we do this AlphaGo style search, and but it can apply to any compute infrastructure problem.
So you have called this kind of agent optimization loop kind of merciless, and you said that this loop is actually very beneficial for building these agents. Can you go elaborate a little bit more why you call it merciless in that sense and why it's beneficial?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
So you've called this like agent the optimization loop for these GPU optimizations.
Yes.
You've called them like merciless in the sense that they do not allow you to be lax. Like it's very strict in that sense, and this is very good for evolving the agents forward. So can you describe what you mean by it's this kind of strict rules that the strict constraints that the GPU puts on you is actually beneficial to agent evolution?
So I think for this one, for GPU problem and in general compute problem, the evolution fit evolution best is because of when each round of the evolution and the feedback signal is clear. For example, on GPU, we know clearly whether this is faster or slower. And if we put in the distributed setting, and we know clearly about whether the utilization is higher or lower, and this gives the clear feedback of the system, which is the possible right direction to go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And other than if for some other field which is not so clear, the signal is not so clear.
How do you? A lot of times when you're optimizing against a single metric, one of the issues that you might have is you get into local minima and maxima, and then you have a problem of getting out of that local minima and maxima. So has that happened to you on this, as you've done this kind of evolved optimization? Have you come across that issue before?
So this is a good question. So a lot of time this evolution will fail because of the proposal is not able to break the local minima, and we found out one game changer is GPT 5.5, and the GPT is so smart on this very hard problem. And many times, like if we use other model and it gets stuck at a plateau, and GPT 5.5 is able to get out and create innovative solutions and to move the needle and get the entire process going forward.
So are you actually using GPT 5.5 with your own harness and own sandboxing system, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes. So the entire Swarm OS is backed by GPT, and we found out that GPT is really good on this hardest problem, and no other model is able to catch up with GPT today.
Okay, so I have to ask: did you try Fable when it was out? Was there any difference?
So first, Fable rejected my request of asking it what is PTX, and the Fable felt like asking what is PTX is a dangerous question.
Yeah. Well, we know who's going to be banned. Who's going to be the first one to be banned.
But in general, I think one characteristic of GPT is beneficial for the evolution system is GPT has the ability to understand what is wrong. So it's not like blindly saying that blindly agree with each other. Otherwise, the swarm will collapse. So for a long time, I think why multi-agent swarm is not being adopted, because also people are using the model which agree with each other. So for example, like two agents, they say that, oh, you're wrong, and then you're absolutely right, and then so they just fall into an infinite loop about you're absolutely right, couldn't go out of box solutions.
So I have to ask, like, you've obviously deployed like hundreds or thousands of agents working together. How do you coordinate their work? I mean, this is a problem that all of us are dealing with. How do you coordinate the work between like so many different agents?
So we are mimic a human organization. So a lot of philosophy of building the Swarm OS and Intel 21 is based on human history. So we are trying to reorganize the human organization structures for the agents, and in this way, which means like we want them to be disciplined, like the agents to be disciplined. So for example, like one observation is like if we give the P2P ability for the agent, usually it will create a mess. And but if we want the agent to be well defined, doing the well defined work, and just like how human society specialize for different work, and this way, like the swarm is highly likely to be operating towards the goal rather than collapsing in the middle.
Can I ask how much this costs? I'm wondering specifically, you could answer with like a dollar value, but I'm wondering if it's the sort of thing that is resource intensive to the point where you have to have something that's pretty well established and you're like kind of planning to move it to a production workload and you're really trying to, save a small amount, but it'll pay off because you're going to run a large amount of inference over time. Or is it affordable enough, or could it become affordable enough that it could be the sort of thing that people start to do as part of research projects? I'm thinking back to Mamba, Mamba 2, where actually a lot of the work was done at the kernel level to show that, a paradigm like this could actually be competitive on the available hardware. So where do you think you sit right now in terms of how accessible this is even to kind of small scale or research projects?
So I think this is coming back to why we are doing self-improving, and because of we are doing self-improving and we are compounding the past experience. So this is actually affordable compared to if you are running from scratch. And this is in general a big problem of AI use today. And because all the organizations today are not compounding about the generation, and it's not doing self-improving, it's not compounding. So every employee is set a limit, and then they use it. They may solve the same problem again and again. This is a big waste. But we are building a self-improving system which is compounding the past. So for example, like when we build a new workload and there are similar structure, and it will learn from the past experience and never do the mistake again. This will dramatically reduce the cost. So this is the key how we are confident that the PTX factory can be a product fit for everyone, rather than like for each one, open the factory and push a button and the $10,000 is gone.
I was just doing a little research this week into Liquid AI,
Yes.
and they have an interesting, somewhat, kind of rhyming approach for searching architecture space. And one of the things that they report is that it's very important for them to have actual target hardware in the loop. They want to make things run on edge devices, phones, so on and so forth. Going back to your comment about the CUDA moat, am I understanding correctly that the CUDA moat is to a significant degree derived from the fact that you don't have to have full hardware in the loop? Whereas if you were going to use other kinds of hardware, like the only way to get an actual benchmark would be to truly run the workload on the hardware. And I gather that NVIDIA makes that a much cheaper process through a sort of virtual estimate. Am I grokking that distinction correctly?
We still need a hardware to get real feedback. And so like for PTX factory, and all the evolution processes running on real NVIDIA GPU. So the moat is coming from the ecosystem around the GPU. So for example, like when we have a kernel, how can we accurately know like the cache, how much cache is the cache utilization of this kernel, and when we want to get the count of the hardware instructions, like how we can accurately get this information. NVIDIA provide all the ecosystem and the tools to help agents to understand what is how the program is running on the hardware. So this is the key for agent and human engineers to develop efficiently on NVIDIA hardware.
Gotcha. So that you're still actually running
Yes.
test kernels within the evolutionary optimization process,
Yes.
but it's the sort of meta diagnostic layer that exists that is giving you the richness of signal that you need in a timely fashion, and that is what is missing from other platforms.
Yeah. I think this is advantage of the CUDA ecosystem.
Yeah. If same kind of question, but for architectures, I think a huge question over time has been, is attention, or the transformer, but really the attention mechanism, is it somehow this like truly unique special snowflake that we stumbled across and we're like really unlikely to improve on it? Or is it just that it kind of got so much optimization and sort of won the hardware lottery, but it's really more of a kind of path dependent sort of state where we find ourselves in? Do you believe that like very significantly different architectures are likely, as your kind of technology matures and is able to optimize them, much faster, presumably, than they otherwise could have been? Do you think we will see a greater diversity in architectures start to come online as a result of that?
I think this is coming from twofold about how we will process forward. So in my point of view, for attention mechanism, it is good enough for a lot of workload today, and if we want to expand this AI technology to everyone, we have to make the cost lower. And I think for intelligence perspective, and attention is doing pretty good. And but cost perspective, people may turn more innovation to reduce the cost, and they may train the first model and the parents model in full attention, but distill into some low precision linear attention models to make everyone to be accessible to the AI. But overall, I feel like attention is really powerful and could take down a lot of intelligence problems we have today.
Cool. Well, thank you, Bing, for being here. This has been a really interesting conversation, and it's good to get out of my comfort zone and try to get a little closer to the metal from time to time. I need an expert guide to help me do that effectively, and I thank you for being our expert guide today. We'll definitely be watching your progress.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bing. Huge fan.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Awesome. It's one of the great pleasures in my life to meet people who have built systems that I have used before. So it never gets old, I think. So that's one thing to note. All right, that's me. Just give us a second. And there we go. There we go. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hi. So let me just do a quick intro. We have with us today Michel Bakker. He's an assistant professor at MIT's Sloan School of Management and a senior research scientist at Google DeepMind. His career is anything but typical. He studied quantum physics in the Netherlands, launched a real estate startup in Myanmar, and sold flowers online in London before diving into the absolute bleeding edge of artificial intelligence. Today, Michel's research sits at the intersection of large language models, AI safety, and human society. He builds systems that explore how AI can help polarized groups make collective decisions and find common ground on deeply divisive issues. But he is here today because he recently co-authored Europe 2031, a highly detailed viral scenario that maps out what happens if the European continent fails to build its own AI infrastructure and becomes entirely dependent on the United States. The timing of this piece was staggering. Exactly one day after it was published, the US government used emergency export controls to shut down Anthropic's most powerful models for all foreign nationals, turning Michel's fictional warning into geopolitical reality overnight. He brings a rare dual perspective, the hands-on technical expertise of a DeepMind researcher and the clear-eyed policy analysis of a global institutional strategist. Michel, welcome to the show.
Thanks. That's a very big intro. I hope I can live up to the expectations. And excited to be here. Thanks.
What was your feeling after publishing the report when the U.S. government announced the export policy controls on Fable?
Yeah, so released a scenario not last Thursday, but the Thursday before, Thursday morning. And it was going, I think, sort of somewhat viral. Some big accounts were picking it up. And then obviously a day later, so Friday evening, the Fable news broke. And so that definitely helped us, right? I would be lying if I didn't say there was something inside us that made us feel a little vindicated. But obviously also we're very worried about this happening so much sooner than we thought it would happen. Right now, it's a bit unclear what the exact cause is, right? Whether it's actually safety concerns, whether it's not safety concerns. But the fact that the US can pull this lever and is happy to pull this lever if they feel it makes sense is, of course, a scary fact for Europe.
So I've read the full scenario, but I'm not sure if all of our listeners have. So maybe a good kind of baseline for you to set would be just kind of sketch out the broad contours of the scenario. You can introduce the characters if you want. I thought the use of a woman in Brussels and a friend of hers that's in the United States was a pretty interesting way to tell the story. But the big kind of themes, I just want to make sure you have a chance to articulate so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, so Europe 2031 is basically a warning story, right? So it's, I think, very obvious who we are inspired by, which is AI 2027, which had, I think, a huge impact to everyone's surprise within the AI ecosystem, also had a huge impact outside of the AI ecosystem, right? So like loads of policymakers, but also, for example, my dad read it, right? Who like never read anything about AI before, let alone something that was so sort of futuristic and out of like the normal Overton window. So we were inspired by that and we're thinking, okay, in Europe, people aren't really feeling sort of viscerally what's at stake, how big these AI developments are and how big the power imbalance currently in AI is between Europe and the US. And so we asked what happens if AI really does become this like main source of economic power, military power, cyber power, and Europe keeps moving slowly, right? It's not that we really change something or we, I think, put Europe on a worse path than they currently are. It's more like, what if Europe keeps doing things somewhat half-heartedly, right? They announce big things, but often these things don't really come to fruition. So in this scenario, the US ends up controlling the most powerful AI systems. I think that's not really a surprise to anyone at this point. China dominates most of robotics and the manufacturing stack, and Europe kind of gets squeezed in between in a very uncomfortable position. And we tell it, as Nathan was mentioning, we tell it through this like two fictional characters who I really like. And so Tom, who is the author, Tom Chivers, who is the author who helped us write this, came up with them. And Caroline is this young EU policy official in Brussels. She's very thoughtful, very loyal to Europe, and very worried that the institutions around her are not moving fast enough. And then Christian is this European founder in Silicon Valley. He's very plugged into the frontier. He's a bit smug, but he is usually right much earlier than Caroline wants to admit. And sort of their friendship shows the gap between these two worlds. So Christian sees AI progress up close, keeps warning her. Caroline, on the other hand, tries to translate that urgency into policy making, but feels that the system is very slow. And I think it works well because, and I've heard this from many people who read it, Christian is just very, very annoying. Like, he's this very annoying, smug AI guy. But annoyingly, he's often right about timelines, right? So he's often the guy who sends you a year later, you see, I told you agents would be coming. And so I think this is a lot how Europeans experience the AI ecosystem from afar, right? It's this thing in SF where you have these AI lab leaders who are all a bit smug, are like a little bit too confident, but are often right. And so that's a scenario, and it sort of plays out over the next 5 years, and we sort of sleepwalk into even stronger dependence than we are currently in.
So I think one of the responses, or one of the ways that European leaders seem to be, or have historically in the last 10 years, and also seem to be depending on in the future, is the ability to regulate and the ability to tell the technology leaders, like, look, this is what is allowed. We're going to, this is how you have to use your technology inside Europe. This is what privacy regulations you have to follow. And so rather than thinking about being completely self-reliant, they're kind of focusing on controlling the power of the tech giants within Europe. Now, why is that not a strategy that looks tenable going forward as well?
Yeah, so it looks tenable if Europe was more powerful, right? So like, imagine Europe was what US is now, right? And Anthropic was in Paris and OpenAI was in Berlin, and like the whole AI ecosystem was in Europe. Then of course Europe could say like, well, guys, the way you're handling your pre-training data is not really fair to whoever created it. So we now have new laws around that. Or the way how you take data from people that use your AI models, we now have new laws around it. The problem is that currently, if you don't really have a seat at the table, it's very hard to regulate this technology, right? So I care a lot about safety and governance of AI. I think this is one of the biggest problems in our time, right? How do we actually have effective governance? How do we make sure that these AI systems are safe, especially if they start improving themselves? So I get a lot of questions in Europe. Well, in the US, you seem to be very pro sort of being stricter on safety and governance. And then in Europe, you seem to be this accelerationist. And the way to sort of, for me at least, to be both at the same time is that in Europe, we first need a seat at the table to have any regulatory power, right? And now we just don't. And I think we can't just keep regulating, because at some point we will no longer have access to this technology.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday about how in the social media scenario, there really is no substitute for the 500 million Europeans who, when the business model depends on putting something of interest in front of human eyeballs, like, that's a market that is just too valuable to ignore. But it seems like a possibility, maybe not as far as an assumption of the scenario, is that if the European regulators make it too difficult to serve the European market, that the AI companies might simply just not bother at all, or maybe make a sort of a token effort. And I think that assumes, tell me if I'm getting any of the strategic analysis wrong, but it seems like that assumes that there's just going to be enough demand to keep all the GPUs running hot from other markets, such that the power this time is inverted. The companies can say, well, I actually do have an alternative to your market. So if you're going to make this difficult, we'll just let the US and other buyers around the world bid up the GPU prices. We don't really need you to do that.
Yeah, and currently we are in a massive compute crunch, right? And like, labs operate in a way that they care more about their future models often than about current revenue, right? So like, we don't really know what the compute split is and how it's used, but sort of some numbers that are going around is like 1/3 on your sort of big run, right? And then 1/3 on doing sort of experiments and 1/3 on serving customers. Now, it's probably been so crazy with AI agents that maybe like revenue takes a bigger part of the compute pile. But if you think that revenue is only maybe 1/3 or maybe half of your compute, and then European revenue is a percentage of that, like then suddenly, if you can go faster on the developing future models and moving towards recursive self-improvement by giving up a European market, that seems like a rational trade. So that's one side of the coin. The other side is that sort of they can still, as long as the playing field is leveled between the American labs and there are no European labs that sort of have some unfair advantages, then they can maybe all serve slightly weaker models to the European ecosystem and still get revenue in Europe without actually having to worry too much about like them regulating their best models, right? So like as you say, Nathan, they could do a token effort and could have some like a smaller, I don't know, compliant model that they're serving specifically for European customers.
So I have two questions, kind of interrelated. Number one, why should European leaders even care? Why not just sit under the US umbrella? Similar to how, in many cases, they have sat under the US umbrella for nuclear for nuclear kind of deterrence. You have only, I think 2 European powers, the United Kingdom and France, with actual nuclear weapons. And the other European powers are clearly technically capable and competent. Enrico Fermi was from Italy. Like they're technically, obviously competent and capable, but have chosen not to, acquire those capabilities. So why not just sit under someone else's umbrella? So that's the first question. And the second question is, what can the middle powers effectively do, without, for example, breaking their, long-term alliances with the United States?
All right. So the first one, why not sit under a US umbrella? And that's obviously the strategy we've been taking sort of for decades now. And I think like nuclear weapons and AI are slightly different because yes, AI is a very important military technology, but above all, it just gives you a lot of competitive economic power, right? So like you can imagine that if AI becomes the sort of dominant source of new scientific discovery or of new like goods and services that are trying to globally compete, then there might be a scenario in which the US says, well, it's not like we're still happy to protect Europe, maybe military, like in terms of defense. And we're still part of NATO, but economically, we are going to keep the best models for ourselves. And so there, I think the nuclear sort of analogy breaks down because right it like for using your nuclear power to protect Europe doesn't really come at an economic loss. So I think to avoid those kind of scenarios, or to at least balance things out more such that it's less in US interest to take these kind of measures, right? And it's obviously all speculation about the future. Like I live in the US, I love the US. I think like there are many scenarios in which this will all play out well. But just to sort of think about that scenario, I think this could happen, and this maybe even in sort of the rational interest of the US to do. So that's on like why not sit under the US umbrella. Then what can middle powers effectively do? So the Netherlands, for example, has ASML, which plays a critical role in the supply chain. Taiwan has TSMC. Japan has like important materials for the semiconductor supply chain. Korea has Highwind with memory. So like I think collectively we are actually quite. Wait, let me just charge my laptop. I think collectively we're actually quite well positioned to play an important role in this AI ecosystem. I do think the middle power coalition, therefore, is going to be important. There's also a scenario which I think was highlighted in Dario's recent essay, where we have some kind of coalition of democratic countries where maybe we sit together with the US, right? So middle powers plus the US, or sort of democratic powers worldwide, and where like one of the principles is that we give each other access to frontier technology. So yeah, there are, I think, scenarios where this middle power coalition could work well, and collectively I do think they have some important assets.
So let me give you a maybe counter proposal. And the counter proposal is basically, if you look at the largest French company right now, it is, I think, it's LVMH. It's a Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. And it's really not selling technology. It's really selling history and culture. And if you look at a lot of European firms who are selling, for example, wine or cheese, or a lot of these products which are associated with Europe in the United States, are basically consumer products which are drawn from history and which are drawn from culture, and not specifically drawn from technology. So you could, for example, make a case that no one is making more hectares of land in Bordeaux. It's a limited resource. There's just not that many more hectares. You can't make more hectares. That's it. The number of hectares is fixed, right? So European economic power doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with technological development. It's kind of a consumer of everyone else's kind of technological development, because once you make enough money, you want to spend it on a vineyard in France. And so it is already at the apex of that human pyramid, where everyone else is kind of like, I need to get by like, working really hard to make transportation. And the Europeans
We're living in the post-AGI world.
Exactly. So maybe you're already living in this, like, the apex of the post-AGI world. And if you're already living in the apex of the post-AGI world, your influence on human affairs is not through technological development, but from cultural supremacy. And it's arguable, actually, that Europeans have achieved cultural supremacy. You have whiskey makers in Japan, and you have winemakers in China and India, and all of this European culture has basically spread out all over the world. And so it's arguable, actually, that it's already been achieved. That supremacy has already been achieved. And you're kind of like just waiting for everyone else to kind of catch up to European lifestyle. So
it's also funny because in Europe, just as a side note, the opposite perspective is often mentioned, right? Where like basically we live in American culture. Like the artists I grew up with are some Dutch artists, but mostly American artists. The movies that I loved growing up are mostly American movies. And so I don't know if European culture is as dominant as you make it seem, but we definitely have important sort of strategic role to play there. I just feel that we have 500 million well-educated Europeans. Like, we should be able to do more. We should be able to play a much more important role than just providing wine and leather handbags, and that are not even manufactured in Europe mostly. Well, maybe they manufacture them in Italy and France. But like, I just feel we should be able to do more with the universities we have, the companies we have, the sort of entrepreneurial spirit that's still very much alive in some parts of Europe. And that if we have the right ingredients to build on, that we can do a lot more. And that, yes, LVMH is an important company, but ultimately the Americans can live and run their economy without leather handbags, and we won't be able to live and protect our citizens and run our economy without sort of AGI access. But
yeah, it's sort of, it seems like
something that I've heard before.
We've seen this play from China over the last couple decades, right? Where they have achieved a economies of scale advantage and ultimately just a cost basis advantage for comparable products that they're now able to go outcompete manufacturing sectors all around the world, because a BYD is $10,000 and it's pretty good. So if countries will allow BYDs into their domestic market, then it becomes really tough for their own automakers and that's why I can't buy a BYD here in the United States, presumably. So it sounds like the sort of biggest worry would be a similar move by the United States on kind of a white collar services level, where and you might even imagine, a Bernie Sanders proposal gets passed, and all of a sudden American households have stock in these AI companies. And then the sort of new American imperialist move is to go run the China play, except it's not manufacturing, it's engineering services that come in on an AI powered basis and are just way cheaper and potentially also better than what German engineers can do. And so it becomes a yikes, I can get this American engineering service via AI at 10 cents or less on the dollar. How's anybody going to compete with that? How do you think what do you think are the highest order bits that European leadership could make now? You kind of described what leverage the rest of the world has with these like critical choke points in the supply chain. What would you say are kind of the next couple things that they should do? Not the everything, not the full, in a full buffet, but like what are the top couple moves that would really strengthen the negotiating position of Europe as quickly as possible?
Yeah, so I think there is sort of two directions. One is like make sure we have some role to play in the full stack, right? So like have a good model company, have your own data centers, right? We barely have any AI compute. Have your own data centers, have a good model company, have your own energy supply that is relatively independent from other countries. Right now, we're like mostly importing LNG from the US, which replaced Russian gas. And so I think like getting the basics right across the whole AI stack is one thing which is good to do. And where like maybe you don't have to be absolutely frontier, but it's nice if in some parts of that stack you have some frontier technology, and we do with ASML, right? And so like if we have it somewhere else, right, we have one really good model, that would be amazing. Then the other thing is like, can you actually build out the positions where you have leverage, right? So like now we have in leather handbags and in EUV machines. And so can you build out those positions? Like, can you have in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, you have ASML, then in Belgium, close by, you have IMEC, then in Germany, you have a few fabs, right? We have quite a good semiconductor ecosystem. And in a way, like the US has now built a fab with TSMC, and they're sort of getting ahead, but we're still ahead in our semiconductor ecosystem. And so like, can we build that out? Can we have funding programs for more chip companies? Can we like make sure that ASML has everything they need, like that they have visa to hire more people, that they have the land to build new factories on? Can we really like strengthen the things that we're really good at much more and sort of build ecosystems around this? Similarly, how SF has built an insane ecosystem around AI.
This is interesting in the sense that I see a lot of European technologists working in the US. I mean, in present company included, but also Leopold Aschenbrenner. And I think I would say roughly about maybe between 10 and 20% of somewhere between 10 and 20% of top AI researchers are probably European. Some Polish, some French, some Dutch, all over the place, German. And many went to some of the best schools in Europe and then came to grad school in the US. And they were also, I think, told by their, to a large extent, they were also told by their advisors and mentors in Europe to go to the US. So I often speak to European grad students, and they will tell me that, hey, they were in grad school and they were in undergrad, they did an undergrad in Poland or something, and their graduate advisor would be like, you're too smart, you have to go to the US. There's nothing for you here anymore. There's nothing anyone can teach you here anymore. You have to go to the US. And they are strongly advised to go. And I've actually come across quite a few grad students in that sense who are told to go abroad. Do you see a way? I mean, are you familiar with that kind of thing? Have you seen that happen to other people?
Yeah.
And do you think that can be changed?
Yeah, so I had a PhD offer, for example, from Delft, where I did my undergrad and master's, and then I got the offers from the US schools I applied to. I got the MIT offer, and my master advisor also said, "Well, Michiel, please go to MIT. You're absolutely insane if you now take the Delft offer." And I think this happens a lot now. So I don't know if we can change that on the timelines that are relevant for AI. But the UK, I think, is one big exception, right? The UK has schools which are globally sort of excellent and dominant, right? And are on par with the best American schools. There are some other exceptions, like the Max Planck system in Germany has really good researchers. The UvA University of Amsterdam has Max Welling, for example, and a whole group that was built around Max Welling. And so there are some exceptions, but largely I think this is a problem, but I don't think one that we can solve on the timelines that are relevant here. Now, I can imagine that if there is a European frontier AI company that is like really credibly saying, okay, we're gonna build recursive self-improvement, we're gonna get to the frontier, and you put out a big banner in San Francisco and say, guys, you vested your OpenAI and Anthropic stock, it's time to go home, that you can actually rally quite a few people around that mission. And so I hope that something like that happens and that many of those Europeans that are educated in the US could get behind a vision like that. Also, because if I speak with European researchers in the US, they often say, well, I'm here for a few years. Ultimately, I want my kids to grow up in like beautiful Europe. So maybe there is something that we can do there.
How much do you think it matters who builds out the compute? Obviously, we have like American hyperscalers going all over the world and trying to build data centers. I don't have my finger on the pulse of how much they're building in Europe versus the United States versus other places. But I'm sure they'd be willing to build an awful lot. If the European governments were to say, go for it, and hyperscalers, already have the financial resources and the know-how to build these things out, would it be enough in some fundamental sense for this infrastructure to be on European soil? Or is it still a problem in your mind if it's kind of owned and operated by American companies?
Yeah, so there is a clear trade-off there. Like the hyperscalers are incredibly good at doing large-scale distributed training, right? So it's maybe going to be hard to do that with like Nebius or Anscale or Skillway, one of the European providers that for inference maybe can do the job, but that for sort of multi-data center, large-scale training, it's going to be hard. And so maybe we need the US hyperscalers to sort of help us with that. And then additionally, I think having US hyperscalers on European soil is maybe not as good for sort of independence and sovereignty as having European compute, or at least European data centers with NVIDIA. So still American compute in there on European soil. But it all like depends a bit on the dynamics, right? So I can imagine that a lot of NVIDIA compute has been sold for the next 2 or 3 years. And so hyperscalers are going to build that somewhere. So if we can make it more interesting for them to build that in Europe, that's going to be something that we cannot otherwise get with European data centers. And so I think these are all trade-offs that we have to keep in mind. Clearly, like European compute, European controlled would be best. American hyperscalers in Europe would still be better than the status quo. And the status quo, where like almost all AI compute is built in the US, is obviously not preferable for Europe.
What do you think would be the major differences if Europeans had their own hyperscalers and their own compute? What policies that the US hyperscalers and the US is implementing right now, besides the Fable ban, obviously, but what policies there that you think would be different if Europe had its own hyperscalers?
And sort of you say like what policies would be
Yeah,
different or
what would be the differences? Like right now, they're dependent on US hyperscalers. If they
Yeah.
were not dependent, if Europe was not dependent on the US hyperscalers for compute, what would the differences be?
So the hyperscalers ultimately have also been the ones that have funded a lot of the AI ecosystem in the US, right? So I think the hyperscalers both provide a critical compute layer, but also the hyperscalers in the US have sort of trained and funded, like Anthropic's funding for a large part comes from Amazon and Google. And so I think they're important for that reason. The other reason they are important is because they have just so much know-how on like how to build large distributed systems, which ultimately it's very hard to build a frontier model without that know-how. So I think those are two obvious things that would have been great for Europe. The other thing is like if you look at the Dutch government, for example, everything runs on Azure, right? So it's crazy how deep the dependencies on American software go in Europe. So if you would have a hyperscaler that, in addition to just building out data centers, would also have a sort of really good Google or Microsoft like enterprise layer on top of that, that would be even better and would change things even more. Now, generally, I'm not against, I don't think it's a good world if like Europe is completely independent from the US and the other way around. Like ideally, we have as much interdependencies as possible, such that sort of we live happily ever after.
When I heard Prakash's question, where my brain was going was a bit of a different direction. I wonder if you could comment on what you think the sort of special twist that Europe could ultimately bring to the AI future might look like. You know, in other words, if there's a positive vision for the AI future with European characteristics, what are those like uniquely European characteristics that, obviously in addition to just like retaining some bargaining power and leverage and, you know, economic parity, but beyond that, the sort of, you know, how are we going to live? How's AI? How are we going to relate to AI? How's it going to serve us versus, you know, kind of dominating us? Is there a European angle on those questions that you think is distinctive or, you know, might inspire people to want to support this mission beyond just the kind of, you know, let's make sure Europe isn't left behind side of it?
It's an interesting question because I got that question a lot also from European policymakers. It's like, well, but one reason we want AI is that we then can have AI with our European values, right? And like we don't need to have those American values or those Chinese values. And I always feel that we kind of exaggerate how different our values are from American values, for example. Like, are Italian and Dutch values, are they more similar than Dutch and American values or American and Italian values? So I think it's not so much that we get an AI that behaves very differently or has somehow a much better constitution because the Europeans have thought about it, right? If anything, there is now a Scottish person who is thinking about, I think Amanda Haskell is Scottish, who is thinking about Anthropic's values. So like maybe we already have these European values in those American models. And so I think the main reason is just that these AI models are sort of ecosystems, right? There is Claude will ultimately also do biology and will do chemistry and will do chip design. And we having a European model that is at the frontier would just create a whole ecosystem of sort of technology development and science and education sort of around these models and these companies. And so I think that's the main reason we should want these models or some European version of those models. Now, there are, of course, subtleties around, for example, privacy, right? So maybe we would design mechanisms around privacy that you have with respect to the AI better or differently in Europe, and maybe that isn't that good for people. But yeah, I think largely the AIs wouldn't look so different if they would be developed in Europe.
Thanks for staying a little bit long with us here. I think I only have one more. I don't know if Prakash, you have any other questions, but my final one is just, what has the response been from policymakers over the last week? Are we is the checkbook open? Are we about to see hundreds of billions of euros flooding in?
So not yet, I think, but the response has been incredible. We've had, I won't mention names, but we have had politicians from very high up from many different European countries, and even from the UK, from Australia, from South Africa, reach out to us that they want to chat. So, for example, I'm going to the Netherlands tomorrow to talk with some cabinet members in the Netherlands. I'm going to Brussels next week. And so there has been a lot of excitement. Well, excitement is maybe a bad word because the scenario is somewhat bleak, but at least excitement around taking action. So that has been really interesting and sort of cool to see. The other thing which I really liked is that at some point I had a friend from high school reach out to me who said, well, can you please ask people to stop sending your scenario to me? They don't even know I went to high school with you. And still 3 people sent me this in the last 2 days. And I think that's ultimately what we were after, was not to have a policy document for people in Brussels per se, or people in The Hague, but to have a scenario that really helps people who are maybe outside of AI understand what's at stake, what Europe's role currently is, how we might be able to change that, and to really start caring about Europe and AI. And so I may be even more excited about sort of the random people that reached out to us that ultimately have a lot of power through being able to vote and be advocates than the politicians that reached out.
Maybe one last question from me, which is, how much influence do you think you can have with non-compute methods? For example, by preparing more data. So one of the problems that I think Europe faces is that Europe has very strict privacy laws, GDPR, and that has limited the amount of data that actually goes into the models. And to a large extent, your influence on what the models can do is determined by how much data you put into them. So if you have a larger corpus of data and you feed it into them, like people on Reddit did, so a lot of the data, initial data was from Reddit, you end up with models with Reddit values and who talk like Redditors, which is what we ended up with. So to what extent do you think maybe the solution for Europe to have more influence and European values to have more influence on these models is actually for Europe to lower its barriers on data collection and to allow more data to be collected from European citizens and to have that be fed into the models? And if that is the solution, what do you think? How do you think that can be implemented or put across to European politicians who are, on the other end of, data protection, so to speak?
Yeah, so I personally think that's not a solution for the reason I said previously. I think the values thing is not the main problem, right? It's not the problem that we get American models that have somehow non-European values and therefore they don't like match whatever we want, right? Like we're working very hard to make these systems corrigible. And so if you tell them, hey, I'm from the Netherlands and these are my values, the systems should somehow like reflect those values. And so I feel, yes, early systems, you're right, they were very Reddit-like, but I think we've gotten quite good at post-training. And so pre-training is more to sort of get general understanding of the world, but that's not where most of sort of the values are created or shaped. And so I think for that reason, both because like this whole values discussion, American European values, I think is a bit of a distraction and Europeans shouldn't focus on too much. And that I think like adding to the pre-training data won't have so much impact. But maybe you disagree. I don't know. I think
I
it is good to say it would be great if Europe says, "Well, I'm sorry for all the people who own newspapers, but we're gonna now create some fair use regime such that European AI companies can use a lot of data, and that's a way to get ahead." But that's maybe a different reason than to make sure that we spread our values.
I actually just open up these questions without knowing what my own answer will be. So
That's good. That's good.
I try not to be too attached to any answer because the answers change over time, and so it's just more kind of a broad. Michelle, thank you so much for spending time with us. And Europe 2031 definitely made an impact. And I hope you can continue to put across opinions and projects that make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and
Great to meet you.
have a great day. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye for now. Note for our recursive self-improvement, we should maybe add an audio field to the guest sign-up form where they can pronounce their name, so we can make sure we're going to pronounce them in just the way they do. I always, for the podcast, I always ask, it's like the last thing I say before I welcome people, and say their name to them. I always ask them to say it to me. Doing it live, we can't really do that, but we could potentially get a little audio capture on the sign up form, and then we'll have no doubt how to say names. I didn't envy you for having to try that one without hearing it first.
Especially Dutch, this because sometimes the spelling can be different, but exactly the same pronunciation as English. So if I messed up, I hope you'll forgive me.
I'm sure he will, but we can always take a note for our personal RSI. I'm with you a little bit. I guess you said you're neutral on this data question, but I've thought for a long time that if I am a middle power of probably all kinds of different stripes, it's going to be real hard for me to compete on GP, on compute. Obviously, it's going to be real hard for me to compete on talent.
Yeah.
I think Europe has a chance. I think the idea that he said of, you vested and it's time to come home, that I think is at least somewhat viable, right? Those strategies obviously aren't available to countries in Africa. They're not available to countries in South America. They're not really available to, most of the countries around the world. But I think there's at least some possibility there for Europe. But the data side does seem like a place where I've just proposed this. Nobody takes the bait on this for whatever reason, but I've kind of said, if you're Brazil, for example, why don't you just put all your data on a silver platter, give it to the frontier companies, and say, here, with this, you can serve us really well. And clearly they'll take it. They'll take at least some of it. They might filter it, but they'll use it. And then you would seem like you stand to benefit because you are more represented. And maybe it's not even a values thing, but just a pure utility thing, right? I mean, just the familiarity with local culture, the ability to kind of make better situationally aware recommendations, understanding how business works in different places. I mean, all these things are just so key to getting practical day-to-day value out of models. And I do think there's a lot of room for, from what I hear, especially from anybody outside of like the top few languages, they kind of say, it doesn't really speak. I mean, it understands our language, of course. It can translate back and forth. But I've heard over and over again, it kind of speaks Polish like an American who learned Polish speaks Polish. And I mean, there's interesting internal. I would say the final word on this is not written, but we have seen a bunch of different mechanistic studies and internal studies that sort of suggest that cashing out to a particular language is kind of late in the forward pass, and the highest kind of complexity representations, the highest abstraction, is sort of separated from any individual human language, right? It's sort of it's not as if you put Polish in and it's Polish all the way through. It kind of works its way up to some language neutral or more language neutral representation and then comes back down. But the cashing out process, definitely seems to be a place where there's a lot of room for improvement across a lot of languages. So I find that to be more exciting if I'm Brazil or Poland or whoever than he seemed to feel, but maybe because I think of it more as a utility thing than a values projection.
So let me show you this this tweet from Rune, which is he was responding to Amanda Askell. I countered this as yes, but people don't ignore it. By ignoring things on our scans is our norm. So they were responding to this idea of the Midjourney scanner. So the Midjourney scanner is going to be an ultrasonic scanner, and it's going to scan your body. You can scan your body every single day if you want to. And doctors immediately came across and they said, well, there's a lot of benign tumors in your body. And when you spot those benign tumors, you're going to do something stupid like, hey, I'm going to get a double mastectomy and remove my breast because there's a benign tumor there. But day to day, there's actually a lot of benign tumors. And unless you complain about pain, then the doctors start to take a look at it. And so they were saying that the scanner was going to cause a lot of people to identify benign tumors and take medical action that they shouldn't. And Amanda Askell's counter to that was, but not ignoring things on scans is our norm, because until recently, we only did scans if there was a clear need. If we move to a scan more often paradigm, the norms of what we do with that information will surely adjust, saying that you're not going to get a double mastectomy if you find a benign tumor. So Rune responded to that and he said, I would expect our whole lives to be recorded and the sheer signal density of your physical and digital presence to go up 10,000 times. Agents and computers to sift through all of it, really, it's a form of worship of human life. And if you look at that as the endpoint of where we're going to, and right now, all we have is maybe like the top 1% of posters on the internet are being heard. That is the distance that we're at. Like, you should have passive observation of every single word, action, mouse click, and screen movement, and every single thing that you've seen in your life should be passively recorded, and the signal from that should be extracted. And we're just not there yet, right? And so we still have this long trajectory of data collection to go. And I think we worry too much about like, hey, who controls like the processing equipment, and not enough about like, hey, we could be generating a lot more data and feeding it in, right? And I think that's where we're really coming from. I think there's so much more signal that gets extracted from the data than from the architecture, right? You have transformers doing all of these, a similar transformer is doing all of the languages, right? The signal is really being extracted from the data, from which languages are being fed in and which words are being fed in. So I think this is where I think I come down on. I think you could actually, allow your country as a middle power to get recorded earlier and to be earlier on this path of providing all of this training data. And then you have this impact of being able to shape the models way, way earlier. And you actually have this huge advantage because the greater powers like the US and Europe are probably not going to lower their privacy standards that much. And so you could have like enormous impact by just providing, let's say, spoken language data for your entire country, and you're just putting it up on the internet and saying like, hey, here's the data, go work on it, right? And right now there's so many barriers, because even if you want to train on data in the US and Europe, you have to like take out any personally identifying information. You have to very carefully like scrub the data. And that takes a lot of effort and time. And it's also an AGI complete problem, because only an AGI would know what is personally identifiable and that you have to remove. So I think there's a huge, huge opportunity for middle powers to essentially just provide a lot of data and use that and help these companies use that data to train the models. So that's where I come from. So
yeah, I buy it. I don't know why. I mean, I think the data cleaning probably has to happen to a significant degree anyway. I feel like the companies don't really want the models to have too much PII memorized. Yeah. So there's almost for sure, and they also don't want their stuff to be poisoned, right? So I mean, they're going to do a pretty careful pass on whatever corpus they're handed, I would think, kind of no matter what, if only for defensive purposes. But I don't think that negates your broader point that there does seem to be a significant opportunity there. And it's odd that we really haven't seen almost anyone try it. I think from what I understand, Japan might be the closest.
Yep.
They've kind of created a right to train
Yep,
type
yep.
of default.
That's right.
Obviously, we have a pretty strong right to train default in the U.S. too. At least people are asking for forgiveness rather than permission, as is so often the American way. China I think
doesn't
too
care.
has
Yeah.
kind of a lot of, although it's mixed in China. I mean, they have a lot of data, but they do care a lot about individual privacy and protection from companies. They don't promise to protect you from the government, but the government in turn tries to protect you from companies there. So it's kind of a inverted paradigm from what we are used to. I spoke to a woman who is in China and is doing licensing of video data and going around to studios and TV stations and just kind of buying up their old catalogs, then turning around and trying to license that to both Chinese AI companies and trying to get outside and license to American AI companies. And it was striking that in her telling, like, she has to license it. She cannot just go scrape it all up somehow. She actually has to go do proper deals. Like the IP rights are respected within China. Now, will they choose to respect all the American Hollywood studios IP? Maybe a different answer to that question. But they are not. It is not a total open wild west in China from a commercial standpoint. To hear her telling of it.
Surprisingly, for new movies, Hollywood rights are respected because Hollywood, China has a limited number of movies that they allow, limited number of foreign movies that they allow in country. And so you need, basically, there's a Communist Party affiliated oligopoly who has like licenses of each person to bring in like 10 or 20 movies a year into country. And they are very heavily incentivized to prevent piracy of those movies. So for those like blockbuster movies, Hollywood studios will sign deals with this oligopoly. They'll bring it in, they will make the money, and they will remit the proceeds. So you're basically just paying a tax to these, influential related parties of the government. It never falls under the US's FCPA rules, so whatever. But that's the ball game in China for new movies. For older movies, I think it's a little bit different, but for new movies, that's the case. For older movies, I think they just make it so cheap because they have such a large population that they're able to say, like, look, I'm going to pay you like 5 cents a showing or whatever, and it's still like way more money than the Hollywood studios would be able to make otherwise. And so it just makes sense. So.
Well, anything else we should cover today? We've got, I think, a very interesting session lined up for tomorrow. We're going to have David Duveneau, who's a professor of AI in Canada.
He's Toronto, right? Toronto, Quebec. He's in Milan, Quebec.
I'm going to have to fact check myself before I answer that question. University of Toronto. And he had previously taken some time off and gone and worked at Anthropic, where he had very good things to say for the most part. He said it was one of the, in fact, I think he said it was not one of the, but the highest functioning companies he's ever seen. One of the most healthiest work cultures. No surprise from his telling that they've been so successful, obviously, in training great AIs and commercializing them so successfully. But the big thing that he found in the lunch table discussions there was we don't really have a plan for our success. Let's say we make these AIs, and let's say that they're really great, and let's say that they even are quite aligned and they like do what we tell them to do and don't take over and kind of push back in the right ways. How does that end up in a place where we are all actually still happy with the final state of things? That is where he says we don't have a good plan. This has become packaged up as, in one memorable paper, gradual disempowerment. The idea that even if the AIs are all good, we will find ourselves run by them rather than us, maintaining, we humans retaining macro control, simply because at every decision point, it will make sense to hand over more autonomous decision-making discretion and authority to AI systems. And if there's no stopping that, does it take us to a good place? His view, as I understand it right now, is that it's really hard to sketch out a scenario where we are happy with the result, even if we solve the most important problems. So he's just put together not too long ago a weekend workshop. I wasn't able to attend, but I was quite sad to miss it. And we'll get the report from the front on, what are the best ideas we have for what life is supposed to look like in the event that all the open research questions are answered in favorable ways. And now we're kind of left to structure society with a mix of humans, more or less as we are today, and powerful AIs that will naturally be the ones best suited to sit in a lot of key decision-making positions. So I think that will be really interesting, and I'm hoping to hear some inspiring new ideas for what that life might look like. But I think the likely scenario is that there aren't too many credible visions that really stand up to scrutiny. But we'll have to hear his telling of it, and we can certainly offer our own and see what he has to say or how he'll shoot them down.
Awesome. Dropped off for a moment there, but let's circle back tomorrow and let's see what David has to say.
We'll see you right back here tomorrow for another exciting edition of AI in the AM. Thanks, Prakash.
Thank you, Nathan. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.